The first rule of a night audit is simple. If the building is empty, you're already too late. The badge reader blinked green like it approved of my existence. It shouldn't have. The plastic card in my hand was a lie, clean, elegant, and temporary. Just like most things that worked. The Mega Holdings Tower rose into the night like a glassed-in thought, all straight lines and confidence. After midnight, it breathed differently. Fewer lights. Less noise. The kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums and asks you what you think you're doing here. I stepped inside and let the doors slide shut behind me. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and money. Somewhere above, servers hummed, steady, patient, expensive. I followed the security lights to the elevator and rode it up alone, watching my reflection multiply in the mirrored walls. Pale face. Sharp eyes. Calm mouth. I looked like a man who belonged. I didn't. People like to think auditors are heroes or vultures. They imagine vendettas, personal grudges, dramatic reveals. It's flattering. It's also wrong. I'm not a hero. I'm not a maverick. I don't believe in justice with a capital J. I'm a sanitation worker. I clean systems that pretend they don't smell. The server floor opened to cold light and glass partitions. Rows of black cabinets stood like disciplined soldiers, LEDs blinking in soft, obedient patterns. The air was chilled to protect the machines, not the people who worked around them. I slipped between racks, plugged in, and let my screen bloom with numbers. At first glance, everything was perfect. Too perfect. Money moved through the company like blood through veins, regulated, measured, predictable. But perfection is suspicious. Real systems are messy. Real systems leak. I zoomed in. Slowed the flow. Watched how transactions curved. How they avoided certain nodes like they were afraid of being seen. Someone had smoothed the numbers. Rounded the edges.
If this story caught you, subscribe. More are waiting.
Hidden a mass by distributing it evenly. A financial anomaly designed not to trigger alarms. Cute, I murmured. My fingers moved faster. Lines of code peeled back like skin. There it was. A pocket of nothing where something very large should have been. A hollow space shaped exactly like intent. That's when the room changed. Not the lights. Not the temperature. The pressure. I felt it the way you feel a storm before the rain hits. A presence that didn't hurry. Didn't need to. The glass wall reflected him before I heard footsteps. Tall. Broad shoulders. Stillness worn like a tailored suit. Well, a calm voice said behind me. That answers a few questions. I turned slowly. He stood just outside the partition, hands loose at his sides, gaze steady, no weapon. No raised voice. No panic. An alpha who didn't need to announce himself. Matt Vale. Head of internal security. The man who locked doors for a living. You should really improve your access logs, I said lightly. Your night shift is sloppy. One corner of his mouth twitched. And you should stop breaking into buildings that don't belong to you. I'm just visiting, I replied. You'd be surprised how welcoming this place is. His eyes flicked to my screen, then back to my face. Measuring. Cataloging. The space seemed to tilt toward him, like the room itself had decided who was in charge. Whatever you're looking for, he said, you won't find it here. I smiled. It came easy. That's funny. I was about to say the same thing to you. For a second, we just looked at each other. Two professionals recognizing the shape of a problem. I reached up and tapped a key. Not enough to trigger alarms. Just enough to leave a mark. A tiny discrepancy. A digital scratch beneath the polish. Something that would itch. Then I unplugged, stepped past him, and headed for the exit. Next time, he said softly, not turning around, you won't make it this far. I glanced back. Next time, I said, you'll be asking different questions. The elevator doors closed between us, sealing the night behind glass. The audit had begun. My temporary base was a furnished apartment that pretended it had a personality. Neutral walls. Generic art. A couch that had never known loyalty. I liked it that way. Places with too much character ask questions. 4 monitors glowed on the desk, painting the room in shades of blue and white. I set my jacket over the chair, poured coffee that tasted like regret, and watched the city breathe outside the window. Neon. Traffic. Insomniacs pretending tomorrow wasn't waiting. I replayed the encounter in my head, frame by frame. Matt Vale didn't rush me. Didn't threaten me. Didn't posture. That alone made him dangerous. Aggressive alphas were predictable. They leaned in, raised their voices, tried to turn space into a weapon. You learn to step aside and let them trip over their own certainty. Matt didn't do that. He stood still, and let the room align itself with him. No wasted movement. No need to prove dominance. The kind of alpha who didn't chase, because he knew things came back on their own. I pulled up his profile. Public first. Decorated resume. Internal security head by 38. Military adjacent background, clean transitions, no obvious scandals. Corporate favorite. Trusted. Trusted people worried me. I switched to private data streams. The ones that didn't exist until you looked at them sideways. As expected, the building's access logs were already tightening. Permissions I'd brushed past an hour ago now required multi-layer authentication. Doors were learning to say no. Efficient, I muttered. I'll give you that. The real confirmation came 10 minutes later. One of my sources, an accountant with a gambling habit and a conscience that only worked after midnight, went dark. His burner number rerouted to static. His email bounced. Not panicked. Not erased. Simply unavailable. That wasn't a cleanup. That was containment. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Executors burned trails. They broke things loudly, left fingerprints, overcorrected. This was quieter. Surgical. No unnecessary damage. Matt Vale wasn't an errand boy. He was a gatekeeper. I pulled transaction maps back up and watched access nodes blink out one by one. Not all of them. Just enough to funnel movement. Whoever was running this didn't want chaos. They wanted control. Which meant Matt wasn't acting alone. I smiled into my coffee. Congratulations, I told the empty room. You're interesting. Corporate alphas love to believe they were predators. Apex beings in tailored suits, feeding on leverage and compliance. Most of them were just well-paid mascots, muscle rented by the hour. Matt was different. He held keys, not whips. And key holders were always closer to the truth than they realized. I typed faster, building a parallel map. If doors were closing, that meant someone had decided where I was allowed to go. Fine. I'd walk the edges. Systems always forgot the margins. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. The city didn't care about corporate wars. It never did. I took another sip of coffee, and winced. If I survive this, I told myself, I'm buying something drinkable. The screens blinked again. A permissions cascade. Too fast for policy, too precise for panic. Matt was locking the building down like he expected company. Me. I cracked my knuckles and leaned in. Non-aggressive alphas were the worst kind. They didn't chase you because they already knew where the doors were. Good thing I'd never used the front entrance. I left the apartment before dawn, which is when cities lie best. The streets were damp from a half-hearted rain. Neon signs bleeding color into puddles. I walked without hurry, hands in my pockets, head down like every other man who had nowhere urgent to be. That was the trick. You didn't run from a hunt. You made it question whether it had picked the right target. The feeling followed me anyway. It started between my shoulders. A pressure, not fear exactly, but attention. Cameras shifted. Cars idled a second longer than necessary. Reflections in shop windows held on to my shape a beat too long. I crossed the street without looking back. A delivery truck blocked the view. When it passed, the sense of being measured came with it. Okay, I murmured. So we're doing this. I cut into a side street and ducked into a parking garage that smelled of oil and old concrete. The gate lifted for my card. Another lie accepted. Levels dropped past me as I descended, my footsteps echoing in a way that made my pulse answer. On the third level, I stopped. Too quiet. I slid between two parked sedans and waited, counting my breaths. 1, 2, 3. The adrenaline sharpened everything, the hum of fluorescent lights, the click of cooling engines, the sound of my own blood trying to outrun itself. Footsteps approached. Unhurried. Of course. I stepped out, pivoted, and nearly walked straight into him. Matt Vale stood a meter away, coat open, posture relaxed. Close enough that I could see the faint shadow under his eyes. Close enough to smell clean soap and winter air. Following people is rude, I said, forcing my voice to stay level. Breaking into private infrastructure is worse, he replied mildly. My heart thudded once, hard, then settled into a faster rhythm. Fight or flight liked to show off when an alpha blocked your exit. I hated how my body registered him before my brain finished insulting him. You're getting sloppy, I said. Parking garages are cliché. They're effective. His gaze flicked around, cataloging corners, cameras, exits. Always exits. You almost tripped the net back there. Almost isn't caught. No, he agreed. It's assessed. I tilted my head. So what's the plan? Arrest me? Lecture me? A faint smile. Not friendly. Not cruel. I want to understand why you're here. That's easy, I said. Curiosity. He didn't buy it. Alphas like him never did. We moved at the same time. Not a fight. Just a repositioning. I slipped past him, and he let me. Like he'd already measured the distance, and decided it wasn't worth closing yet. The elevator was at the far end. Glass walls. Cameras in every corner. I stepped in and hit the button, expecting him to block the doors. He didn't. The elevator began to rise. I exhaled slowly, then noticed my hands were shaking. Adrenaline always demanded payment. The doors didn't open at street level. They stopped between floors. Lights dimmed. A controlled pause. Matt's reflection appeared beside mine in the glass. He hadn't followed me inside. That was worse. You're good. His voice came through the speaker, calm as ever. Better than most. Flattery won't get you my number, I said. A soft huff. Almost a laugh. You're not the only one being watched, he said. The line went dead. The elevator resumed its climb. When the doors opened, the street was waiting, indifferent as ever. I stepped out into the night, heart still racing, and understood one thing very clearly. This wasn't a chase. It was a setup. The closed segment of the network didn't look like much. No graphics, no dashboards, just a black screen and a blinking cursor. Patient as a predator that knew it would be fed. This was the space beneath permissions, beneath logs, the quiet where systems whispered truths they didn't know how to hide. I liked quiet. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and let the world narrow to text and time. Every keystroke echoed too loudly in my head. Outside, the city slept. Inside the network, something was very awake. I started with my own trail. That was rule number 2 of survival: assume you're compromised, then prove it. At first, everything matched. Entry points. Timestamp drift. The familiar fingerprints of my work. Clean, minimalist, almost polite. Then I saw it. A checksum that resolved correctly, but shouldn't have existed at all. I frowned, and leaned closer to the screen. Someone had touched my data, not deleted it, not corrupted it, adjusted it, smoothed it. The way you'd edit a photograph so subtly the subject wouldn't recognize themselves anymore. My pulse slowed. That wasn't Matt. If it were him, the changes would have been defensive. Walls raised, access revoked, noise introduced to flush me out. This was something else. Someone had gone into my work after the fact and nudged it just enough to alter conclusions without breaking integrity. They were reframing the narrative. Clever, I whispered. And rude. I mapped the edit trail backward, expecting to hit internal security protocols, Veil's signature containment layers. I didn't. The trail vanished into a permissions ghost, an executive-level override masked as routine maintenance. No human error. No urgency. Just authority. That was when it settled in. Matt Veil wasn't hunting me. He was being used to fence me in. I sat back and stared at the ceiling, letting the silence press against my thoughts. Somewhere above us, someone had decided that an internal conflict, a rogue auditor versus an overzealous security head, would make a convenient explanation for a hole the size of a small country. They needed a story. We fit. My cursor blinked, waiting. Fine, I said to the screen. Let's compare notes. I routed a message through 3 dead channels and one that technically belonged to a defunct subsidiary in Luxembourg. If Matt was watching, he'd see it. If he wasn't, that would be interesting too. We need to talk, not about access, about edits, somewhere quiet. The reply came faster than I expected. I was hoping you'd notice. Name the place. No threats, no posturing, just acknowledgement. I exhaled slowly. The tension didn't leave. It rearranged itself. You didn't touch my data, I typed. Which means someone above you did. A pause. Longer this time. That's what I wanted to confirm. I watched the cursor blink, felt the strange steadiness in my chest. Not relief. Not trust. Alignment. Temporary truce, I sent. Until we know who benefits. The answer came almost immediately. Temporary, he agreed. And careful. I closed the connection and sat in the dark, listening to my own breathing. The enemy had a better view than I thought. But at least now I knew something important. The man holding the keys wasn't the one who'd locked us in. The cafe stayed open 24 hours a day, and pretended it did so out of kindness. In reality, it survived on bad coffee, better pie, and people who didn't want to be alone with their thoughts. At 3 in the morning, it was mostly empty. A waitress with tired eyes wiped down the counter like it had personally offended her. A trucker slept in a corner booth. The windows reflected us back in fragments, 2 men sharing neutral territory, neither quite relaxed. Matt Vale arrived on time. Of course he did. He didn't scan the room the way paranoid men did. He took it in once, calmly, then sat across from me like he already knew where the exits were. His coat stayed on. Mine too. A mutual understanding, we weren't staying long. Coffee? The waitress asked. Yes, Matt said. No, I said. Then after a beat actually, yes. But if it tastes like despair, I'm blaming you. Matt's mouth twitched. Fair. When the waitress left, the silence stretched, not awkward but alert. This was the part where power games usually started. Alphas liked to push. Omegas were expected to react. Matt didn't do either. You were right, he said. About the edits? I know. He watched me for a moment, then nodded, like that answer satisfied him. They're using an executive override, old one, buried deep. Old power never deletes itself, I said. It just changes the name on the door. Exactly. I wrapped my hands around the mug when it arrived, welcoming the heat. So, temporary truce. Temporary, he agreed. No arrests, no ambushes, no surprises. I raised an eyebrow. You say that like you don't enjoy surprises. I enjoy preparation, he replied. Surprises are for people who didn't plan well enough. That earned him a smile. Small. Genuine. My conditions, I said. You don't touch my access points without telling me. I don't dump data without warning you. If one of us needs to disappear, the other doesn't interfere. And if you find something that implicates me? I already did, I said dryly. You're still here. A quiet laugh escaped him before he could stop it. He covered it with a sip of coffee. You don't behave like most omegas I've dealt with, he said carefully. I tilted my head. And you don't behave like most corporate alphas. We're both disappointments. Speak for yourself. The pie arrived, cherry, bleeding red onto white plates. I hadn't ordered it. Neither had he. The waitress shrugged. On the house. You both look like you need sugar. When she left, Matt studied the pie like it might explode. I didn't realize this was a date. It's not, I said. If it were, I'd already be bored. Noted. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the tension easing into something workable. Not trust. Something adjacent. Respect's awkward cousin. I won't pressure you, Matt said finally. Not now, not later. I looked up, surprised despite myself. Good, I said. Because I bite. Do you? His eyes flicked up, curious rather than challenging. Only when people assume things about me. He nodded once. Then we'll avoid assumptions. I leaned back, studying him, the stillness, the control, the deliberate absence of dominance. Interesting. Outside, the night pressed against the glass, listening. This doesn't make us allies, I said. No, he agreed. It makes us aware. I raised my mug in a mock toast. To temporary awareness. He clinked his cup against mine. The truce wasn't trust. But it was a beginning. The server floor looked different after midnight. Emergency lighting washed everything in a low amber glow, softening edges, stretching shadows. The hum of the machines deepened, like the building had dropped its voice once the day staff went home. Glass partitions reflected us back in fragments, 2 figures moving in parallel, never quite touching. Try not to trip anything, Matt murmured into the calm. I love how that implies I usually do, I whispered back. I've read your work. Then you know I only trip systems on purpose. A pause. That's not comforting. I smiled despite myself. We moved together through the aisles, a choreography we hadn't rehearsed but somehow understood. I slid under permissions. He ghosted past cameras. When I paused, he paused. When he lifted a hand, I stopped. No words needed. It was efficient in a way that made my chest feel oddly light. Close, but not close enough to brush. I could feel him though. The way alphas filled space without trying. The faint warmth at my back when he leaned in to check a panel over my shoulder. The clean, neutral scent of him cutting through the sterile air, not overwhelming. Just present. Left node's lagging, I said. On it, he replied, already moving. Our reflections crossed in the glass. For a second, it looked like we were standing chest to chest. My body reacted before my mind could make a joke about it, breath hitching, pulse skidding. I hated that part. I hated that biology remembered things I'd taught myself to ignore. I focused on the code. Your overrides are elegant, I said, fingers flying. I hate them. High praise, he said. From you, I'll take it. A warning icon flickered. I froze. Hold, I breathed. He was instantly still. So close now that I could feel the heat of him without contact. The alert hovered, indecisive. I rerouted power, whispered a promise to the system, and watched the icon fade. We exhaled at the same time. Nice catch, he said softly. Don't get used to it. Wouldn't dream of it. We advanced. My shoulder brushed the glass, his shadow overlapped mine. The tension wasn't sharp anymore. It had turned into something taut and quiet. Like a wire pulled just short of snapping. You always work like this? I asked, because silence felt dangerous. With auditors? He replied. No. With anyone. Another pause. No. I glanced back. His face was calm, focused, but there was something there, an awareness that matched mine. Not hunger, not dominance. Recognition. Good, I said. I'd hate to be forgettable. That won't be a problem. A laugh slipped out before I could stop it. I clamped down on it. Shook my head. Careful, Vale. Compliments are a gateway drug. Noted, he said. I'll switch to criticism. Please. I thrive on it. We reached the core node together. The data opened like a confession. I sank into it, steady, precise. Matt stood guard without hovering, close enough to intervene, far enough not to crowd. Strange thing was, I felt calm. Not the brittle calm I usually wore on jobs. Something deeper. Like my nervous system had decided this right now was manageable. That this alpha, in this dim light, wasn't a threat. I didn't like that. I also didn't fight it. Almost done, I said. I've got you, he replied, simple as that. When the task finished, the lights hummed on as if nothing had happened. The night swallowed our footprints. We stepped back, space returning between us. The wire eased, but it didn't disappear. After midnight I said lightly, things always look closer than they are, or farther, he said. I met his eyes and held them for a beat longer than necessary. Let's get out of here, I said. We left together, sparks trailing in the dark. The temporary server lived in a place that wasn't supposed to exist, an abandoned data closet, 2 floors below ground, shielded just well enough to pass as forgotten infrastructure. By the time we locked ourselves inside, night was thinning into that gray hour where everything feels exposed. The kind of hour that makes truth restless. Lines of data sprawled across my screen, converging into something ugly and elegant. Financial flows. Access overrides. Incident reports rewritten just enough to change causality. It wasn't chaos. It was choreography. They planned this, I said quietly. Months in advance. Matt leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes on the projection. They planned us. I traced the path with my finger. Look at the escalation points. Every time I get close, your department clamps down. Every time you isolate a leak, I surface somewhere louder. A perfect internal conflict, he said. Auditor versus security, competence turned into rivalry. Sold to the board as proof the system works, I added. Look, this memo. I pulled it up. Time-stamped weeks before I ever touched the company. Contingency language. In the event of internal exposure. They needed scapegoats. He exhaled slowly, the sound almost a laugh. And we volunteered. No, I corrected. We were selected. Silence settled, thick but not heavy. The server hummed like it was listening. This isn't my first time, Matt said after a moment. I looked up. There was another case, he continued, voice steady. Different company. Same pattern, smaller scale. I thought I shut it down. His jaw tightened. I was wrong. What happened? I asked. They let it burn just enough to look real, he said. Blamed a mid-level team. I signed off on the findings. His eyes flicked to mine. I believed the report because I wanted it to be over. I didn't interrupt. Confessions needed room. That team lost everything, he finished. Careers. Some of them worse. A pause. I promised myself I wouldn't let that happen again. I swallowed. Welcome to the club. He waited. I don't work in teams anymore, I said. Not because I can't. Because I remember what it costs. I pulled up an old file, redacted names, familiar structure. 5 years ago I was part of a joint audit task force. Big case. We trusted the framework, the checks. One of us sold early. My mouth twisted. Not for money. For protection. From what? Matt asked. From being alone when the system decided to erase us. The memory tightened my chest. The sudden silence from teammates. The way the narrative shifted overnight. I was the only one who didn't play along, I said. So I became the problem. Matt nodded, slow and thoughtful. No pity. No alpha concern. Just understanding. They like to break people in pairs, he said. Looks cleaner. Efficient, I replied. They should put that on a mission statement. A faint smile crossed his face, gone almost immediately. We stood there, the pattern laid bare between us. 2 lines intersecting because someone needed an explanation simple enough to print. This ends with us either disappearing, he said, or making noise they can't contain. I glanced at the time. Dawn was creeping closer. I don't disappear well. I noticed the hum of the server filled the space. Steady and insistent. I felt closer to him than I had during the operation, closer in a way that had nothing to do with proximity. They expect us to fracture, I said. To turn on each other. Then we don't, he said. It wasn't a promise. It was a decision. I nodded once. Let's break the pattern. Outside, the city held its breath, waiting to see who would move first. The roof was colder than I expected. Wind dragged itself along the concrete, tugging at coats, carrying the distant noise of the city like an afterthought. Below us, streets threaded together in lines of light, alive and indifferent. Up here, the building felt exposed. No walls, no glass, nowhere to hide behind credentials or job titles. My watch blinked. 3:17 a.m. Matt stood near the edge, hands resting on the railing, looking down like he was measuring the drop. Not the height, the consequences. This is where most people leave, he said. I joined him, careful not to stand too close. I always thought they left earlier. Right after the first warning sign. He glanced at me. You could go now. So could you? Yes, he agreed. That's the problem. The city breathed beneath us. Somewhere, a siren wailed, and then cut off abruptly, like someone had decided it wasn't worth the trouble. They'll offer me an out, Matt said. They already have. Quiet reassignment. New title. The narrative stays intact. And you? I asked. I sign a statement. Internal conflict. Overzealous security. I failed to contain you. His mouth curved without humor. Very clean. I huffed. Flattering. You'd vanish, he continued. Data buried. Reputation shredded just enough to make you radioactive but not worth pursuing. You know how it goes. I did. My shoulders tightened in response. Memory surfacing uninvited. And if you take it? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Wind pushed between us. Cold and sharp. I get to keep my access, he said finally. My influence. I can convince myself I'll fix things from the inside. His eyes met mine. I've done that before. The honesty caught me off guard. I'd expected justification. Instead, he gave me doubt. What about you? He asked. I laughed softly. My exit plan is simple. I disappear, change cities, new work, same nightmares. I shrugged. I'm good at surviving. But not at pretending, he said. I looked at him then, really looked. The controlled posture. The careful distance. The alpha who'd learned that obedience could wear the same uniform as authority. They want us separate, I said. They always do. Yes. If you take their offer, I went on, they win. Quietly. He stared out at the city again. For a long moment, I thought he'd choose the system. It would have made sense. It would have been smart. Then he straightened. No, he said. Just that. No speech. No drama. No, he repeated, firmer. I'm done letting them decide who takes the fall. Something loosened in my chest. Not relief, resolve. I nodded once. Then, the first day. He turned to me, surprised. You don't have to. I know. I met his gaze. That's why it matters. The wind howled, as if the building disapproved. After this, he said, "There's no going back." I smiled, sharp and honest. There never is. We stood there at 3:17 a.m., two figures on the edge of something irreversible, and made the kind of choice systems hate most. We chose each other. The first file went live at 3:41 a.m. I watched the progress bar fill with a detached calm that felt almost holy. Data doesn't care about fear. It moves when told to move, and when it's released, it doesn't come back. "Leak 1 is out," I said into the comm. "Confirmed," Matt replied. No hesitation. Security chatter just spiked. "Good," I said. "That means they noticed." The building woke up in stages. Emergency lights flared to full brightness. Doors locked, then unlocked, then locked again, as systems argued with themselves. Somewhere above us, a siren began to scream, and then cut off mid-note, strangled by an override that didn't want witnesses. We split. I took the east stairwell, 2 steps at a time, lungs burning, adrenaline turning the world razor sharp. My tablet vibrated against my wrist as more files released themselves into the open. Transaction, histories, internal memos, carefully worded lies stripped down to numbers and timestamps. "Leak 3 in 10 seconds, I said. "Hold," Matt replied. "Cameras rerouting." Footsteps echoed below me. Too many. Security teams. Real ones this time. I swore under my breath and ducked onto the next floor, sprinting past empty cubicles and glass offices that reflected my panic back at me in triplicate. I slid into an elevator just as shouting reached the hall. "Go, go, go," I hissed, slamming the button. The doors closed on a gloved hand. They opened again. A security officer stared at me, surprise flashing across his face. He reached for his radio. "Problem?" I asked, forcing my voice steady. He hesitated. That half-second saved me. "Stand down." Matt's voice cut through the elevator speakers, calm and authoritative. "Subject is cleared." "I'm overriding." The officer froze. Authority did that to people. He stepped back, confusion written all over him, and the doors slid shut. My knees went weak as the elevator dropped. "You just put your name on this," I said into the comm. "I know," Matt replied. "Leak 5 is about to hit. Keep moving." The elevator opened into the underground level. I bolted into the night air, the city slapping me with noise and cold. Cars screeched as I cut across traffic, disappearing into a crowd that didn't know it was being used as camouflage. My tablet buzzed, non-stop. Notifications stacked, alerts screamed. The internet was waking up. "Leak 7 confirmed," I said, breathless. "Board-level exposure," Matt said. "They're scrambling." A black SUV swerved toward me at the corner. I ran, vaulting a barrier. Heart pounding so hard it hurt. A hand grabbed my sleeve. I twisted, slipped free, and ducked into a subway entrance just as the vehicle screeched past. The underground swallowed me. I leaned against the tiled wall, chest heaving, vision tunneling. For a split second, I saw how this could end, with me cornered, labeled the rogue, everything pinned neatly on my back. "Status?" Matt asked. "I'm still breathing," I said. "Barely." "Good. Because I'm about to make things loud." Screens across the city flickered to life. Matt's face appeared on every internal channel, every press feed the corporation controlled. Calm. Centered. In charge. "There has been a significant breach," he said publicly. "And I take full responsibility for allowing these systems to operate without sufficient oversight." I stared at my screen. "Internal security failed," he continued, "not because of one individual, but because the structure itself was compromised. My name didn't appear. Not once." I slid down to sit on the cold tile, shaking. "They're going to come for you," I said quietly. "I know," he replied. "But they won't be able to ignore the data." Sirens wailed above ground. The city buzzed with rumor and revelation. The leaks kept coming. And for the first time since this began, I trusted the man on the other end of the line to hold the door open while I ran. The boardroom looked exactly like it always did on television. Glass walls. A long, polished table. Faces arranged in practiced concern. Cameras hovered at calculated angles. Red lights blinking like patient eyes. This was the room where narratives were built, clean, convincing, and usually irreversible. Matt stood at the head of the table. I stood 2 steps behind him, just out of frame. "The situation is unfortunate," the chairman said, hands folded. His voice carried the mild disappointment of someone discussing weather. "But internal conflict happens. It's the price of transparency. I almost laughed. A screen lit up behind them, showing my name in clean corporate font. External auditor. Unauthorized access. Repeated breaches. They'd worked fast. This individual exploited gaps created by overzealous security protocols, another director added, glancing toward Matt. A failure of coordination. There it was. The story. Matt didn't react. He didn't interrupt. He waited. I stepped forward before anyone asked me to speak. The cameras caught me fully now. Tired eyes, steady posture, nothing theatrical. With respect, I said, and meant none of it. The timeline is inaccurate. A murmur rippled through the room. I connected my tablet to the main display. The system resisted for half a second before folding. Matt had already stripped its defenses. The screen shifted from accusation to data. These edits, I continued, pointing, were made before my involvement. Executive-level overrides. Logged as maintenance. I looked at the chairman. Which means someone in this room authorized them. Silence. You're suggesting a conspiracy, a director said sharply. I'm suggesting arithmetic, I replied. Conspiracies are messy. This was efficient. I scrolled. Memos. Transfers. Contingency plans labeled internal exposure scenario. They prepared a conflict between internal security and external audit months ago, I said. Because when the truth surfaced, they needed a story that didn't include them. The chairman's smile tightened. This is speculation. Matt moved then. He tapped his watch once. Every screen in the room flickered. Internal channels opened. External ones followed. Firewalls collapsed like paper walls. I disabled the narrative locks, he said calmly. They can't contain this anymore. Faces paled. You don't have the authority. Someone started. I do, Matt said. Because you gave it to me when you decided security should report directly to you, remember? He tilted his head. Or did you forget that meeting? The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Accusations flew. The cameras caught everything. The cracks, the panic, the sudden absence of control. The system so carefully balanced began to eat itself. I stayed quiet. That was the trick. Letting the truth breathe without dressing it up. One by one, alerts chimed on the director's devices. External investigations, media inquiries, regulators who hadn't been invited but had shown up anyway. This meeting is adjourned, the chairman snapped. No, Matt said. It's documented. Security flooded in, but not the kind the board expected. External, federal, neutral. As they were escorted out, the glass walls reflected a room emptied of power. When it was over, the cameras went dark. Matt turned to me, exhaustion finally breaking through his composure. You okay? I nodded. My hands were steady. My chest felt hollow and full at the same time. They tried to bury us, I said. They underestimated arithmetic, he replied. We walked out together, leaving the boardroom behind, a transparent cage with nothing left inside. The system hadn't just cracked. It had collapsed under the weight of its own lies. Morning arrived without ceremony. No alarms. No breaking news chyrons screaming for attention. Just pale light sliding through the glass and settling on surfaces that had once mattered more than people. The office was empty. Not abandoned. Emptied. Chairs pushed in. Screens dark. A few cardboard boxes stacked by the door like an afterthought. The kind of silence that followed a collapse, when everyone had already decided not to be here. I stood alone at a desk that didn't belong to me, and powered up the last terminal. The corporation was falling in slow motion now. Trading halted. Executives suspended. Investigations announced in careful, bloodless language. Online, the leaks were being dissected by people who'd never know how close the story had come to being buried. I opened the final file. It was small. A summary. Cross-referenced conclusions with no commentary. I'd learned the hard way that truth didn't need adjectives. It needed clarity. I read it once. Then again. My cursor hovered over the close command. For years, endings had been messy. People yelling. Doors slammed. Names dragged through courtrooms and comment sections until nothing recognizable remained. I'd grown used to running, to leaving systems in pieces behind me. This time felt different. I closed the file. The confirmation blinked once, then disappeared. No fireworks, no applause. Just a clean ledger and a quiet machine returning to idle. I leaned back and let my head rest against the chair. Breathing felt easier than it had in weeks. Outside, the city moved on. People walked dogs, ordered coffee, argued about nothing. The world was remarkably resilient when corporations died. Footsteps echoed softly behind me. I didn't turn right away. I didn't need to. They're calling it a restructuring, Matt said. His voice was rough around the edges. As if that word can fix anything. I smiled faintly. It always sounds less violent. He came to stand beside me, close but not invading. The light caught the lines of fatigue on his face. He looked like a man who'd stayed awake long enough to see a lie collapse. They offered me a consulting role, he added. Different company, same language. And I said no. That loosened something in my chest I hadn't realized was still tight. We stood there in the quiet, surrounded by the aftermath of something that had mattered too much, and then not at all. Are you done? He asked. I glanced at the dark screen. Yeah. Clean files. He nodded. Good. We walked toward the exit together. The glass doors opened without argument. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was leaving something unfinished. The silence followed us out into the morning, light and unburdened. A pause. A breath. The audit was over. Daylight made the city look honest. Not kinder, just less interested in pretending. Office towers reflected the sky like nothing had ever gone wrong inside them. Traffic moved with the confidence of routines that survive scandal just fine. I stood on the corner with a paper cup warming my hands, watching steam rise like a quiet confession. Matt showed up 2 minutes late. I noticed because I'd checked the time. He noticed because he lifted the cup in apology. Consulting myself, he said. Old habit. I'll forgive you, I replied. But only because this coffee is decent. He took a sip. High praise. We fell into step without thinking about it, the sidewalk carrying us forward. No bodyguards. No comms. Just 2 men with caffeine and too much shared history for people who'd met less than a week ago. So, I said. What happens now? He shrugged. They'll rebuild. Someone always does. Different name. Same ambition. And you? Undecided. He glanced at me. For the first time in a while. I nodded. I'm between contracts. That sounds like a threat. It is, I said mildly. We crossed at the light. A cyclist swore at a cab. Somewhere, someone laughed too loudly. Life continued, gloriously unconcerned. You know, Matt said, most people would call what we did reckless. Most people think obedience is the same as stability. He smiled at that. A real one this time. Fair. We stopped near a small park, benches already claimed by early lunch crowds. Sun filtered through trees that hadn't heard of boardrooms. I won't pretend I'm good at partnerships, I said. I have a history. So do I, he replied. Mine usually involves structures collapsing. Promising. Devastating, he agreed. Silence settled, comfortable and unforced. I'm not asking for anything, he said. No titles. No contracts. Good, I said. I tend to audit those. Another smile. This one softer around the edges. Still, he continued, if our paths overlap, I wouldn't mind not being on opposite sides. I considered that. The past versions of me would have deflected. Made a joke. Left before morning. This version stayed. Enemies take too much energy, I said. I'm trying to be efficient. He laughed quietly. Figures. We stood there, coffee cooling, city breathing, neither of us in a hurry to leave. There was no promise hanging between us. No dramatic declaration, just a sense of alignment that didn't need reinforcement. When we finally parted, it was with an easy nod and no urgency. I walked away lighter than I'd arrived. The noise of the city folding around me. The audit was over. The night didn't take everything from me.